Today is Friday, May 26th. What you need to know ahead of the Memorial Day weekend, from how to honor fallen heroes to this weekend's travel trends. Also, what the Supreme Court decided about the power of the EPA. And a new report highlights the dangers of Navy SEAL training. Plus, the average American's age is rising. A new competition meant to help rein in artificial intelligence. And which stars are joining what's known as the greatest spectacle in racing this weekend. Those stories and more news to know coming up. Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in around 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. I'm Erica Mandy. Thanks so much for being here. You ready? Let's do this. Americans are getting ready to honor the men and women who died serving the U.S. military. Memorial Day is coming up Monday, so there are events planned all weekend. The VA site lists hundreds of them around the country. Some people visit cemeteries or memorials, plant flags, participate in relays or parades. On Sunday, the National Memorial Day concert will be live-streamed on PBS from the nation's capital at 8 p.m. Eastern. On Monday, President Biden will lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier in the Arlington National Cemetery. And many Americans mark Memorial Day with an official moment of remembrance at 3 p.m. local time. During that time, Amtrak conductors sound one long whistle in honor of those who have died in service. Besides all the official reasons for the holiday, Memorial Day is also considered the unofficial start to summer. And that's especially the case for everyone who gets an extra day off from work or school. The day tends to be full of barbecues, sales, family get-togethers, and vacations. And AAA says this Memorial Day is expected to be one of the busiest ever, both on the roads and in the skies. More than 42 million Americans are expected to travel 50 miles or more this 3-day weekend. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, was dealt another setback this week. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court decided to limit the EPA's authority over millions of acres of wetlands. The majority of justices say under the Clean Water Act, the EPA can only regulate wetlands if they're connected to larger bodies of water. So the decision could spare a lot of property owners and developers the sometimes great expense and even potential criminal liability for what happens on their lands. But President Biden said he was disappointed by the court's decision, since he says the wetlands are critical in safeguarding America's streams, rivers, and lakes from chemicals and pollutants that can hurt people's health and well-being. Now Biden says the EPA and the rest of his administration will use every legal authority they still have to make sure all Americans still have access to clean, safe water. All that said, there are plenty of people happy about the Supreme Court's decision. For example, farmers and oil companies who say it will make it easier for them to do their jobs with less interference from the federal government. This is actually the High Court's second major decision in less than a year to limit the EPA's authority. The last time it took away the agency's power to limit emissions from coal plants. The founder of a far-right extremist group just got the most serious punishment yet for taking part in the January 6th Capitol riot. Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rhodes was sentenced to 18 years in prison. You'll remember a jury found him guilty last year of a rare seditious conspiracy charge, essentially accusing him of trying to overturn the government by trying to prevent the peaceful transition of power from one president to the next. And this week, for the first time, a judge found his conduct amounted to terrorism. Rhodes now says he plans to appeal his conviction and sentence and has called himself a political prisoner. All in all, more than 1,000 people have been charged in connection to the Capitol riot so far. The notoriously brutal Navy SEAL training that's considered the gold standard for special forces around the world seems to have become especially dangerous. The Navy started an investigation after a sailor died last year, and it just ended with a 200-page report that came out this week. More than anything else, it points to the brutal basic underwater demolition test. That test lasts 5.5 days. It's so grueling that at least 50 to 60% of candidates do not finish it. Seaman Kyle Mullen collapsed and died just hours after completing it last year. The report says he had pneumonia. And when he struggled to breathe, the medical officer on duty told other officers not to call 911, warning them that it could interfere with training. He's actually the 11th person to die from this course. After he died, Navy personnel found performance-enhancing drugs in his car, and an investigation then found wider drug use among SEAL candidates. Since then, the Navy has made some changes. It reassigned 8 sailors and officers. Their replacements have increased oversight of instructors and added closer medical monitoring of students after finishing the tests. Commanders are also doing more drug testing and heart screenings. Navy leaders say they're going to make sure the course still stays intensely demanding and rigorous, so only elite SEALs are chosen. But now there will be a commitment to safety, too. The U.S. is growing older faster. New U.S. Census data shows the share of seniors in the U.S. grew by more than a third from 2010 to 2020, and at the fastest rate of any decade in the last 130 years, all while the share of children went down. Combined, those trends mean the median age in the U.S. has jumped from 35 in the year 2000 to 37 in 2010, and now nearly 39. Experts say there's a few things going on here. 1, women are delaying having babies until later in life. 2, baby boomers are turning 65 or older. And 3, people are living longer. We have much more news for you coming up. But first, this episode is sponsored by Wondery's new podcast, Think Twice. Michael Jackson was one of the most influential pop stars of all time, but his legacy is tainted by accusations of sexual abuse. Since his death in 2009, the world has struggled with how Michael Jackson should be remembered. As an eccentric cultural icon, a global humanitarian, or a monster. In their new podcast, Think Twice, Michael Jackson, journalists Leon Neyfakh and Jay Smooth delve into the complicated and unresolved legacy of the King of Pop. Through dozens of original interviews with people who watched his story unfold up close, Think Twice reveals a new perspective on his artistry, his controversies, and how we should remember him. Follow Think Twice, Michael Jackson on Audible or the Amazon Music app. A major new study from the National Institutes of Health is shining some new light on the long-term effects of COVID-19. It says about 1 in 10 people who get the Omicron variant of COVID-19 will get what's called long COVID. With this study, researchers did actually define long COVID as having at least one of a dozen distinct symptoms for months or years after even a mild case of the virus. They include fatigue, brain fog, dizziness, gastrointestinal symptoms, heart palpitations, loss of smell or taste, chronic cough, and more. For the research, people self-reported their symptoms in a survey, and each symptom was given a score. Then someone with a score of 12 or more was considered someone who was very likely to have long COVID. Now, the hope is, by giving a more clear picture of exactly what people are dealing with, researchers will eventually know how to treat long COVID and maybe even how to prevent it. But first, they plan to connect these survey responses with biological data, like blood samples and scans, to get into what causes these long-term symptoms in some people, but not others. They also want to start studying children and are enrolling volunteers now. And we just talked all about long COVID with an epidemiologist during our special edition Saturday episode last weekend. So we'll link to it in today's show notes if you want to learn more. Pfizer's antiviral COVID-19 treatment now has full FDA approval. The pill Paxlovid is now approved for adults who are considered at high risk of getting seriously sick from COVID-19. Already, it's been prescribed under the FDA's emergency use authorization, and it's been available for free through the federal government. But now that it's really approved, even more doctors may be willing to prescribe it. Plus, they'll have more leeway in how they use the drug. In trials, Paxlovid lowered the risk of hospitalization or death by 86% in people at risk for severe disease, and side effects were mild. Well, the people behind ChatGPT have made it no secret they want AI to be regulated. So now the company, OpenAI, is hoping to crowdsource some oversight. It says it wants to bankroll people, teams, and organizations who can come up with a democratic process deciding what rules AI systems should follow within the bounds defined by the law. It launched a program to award 10 $100,000 grants to fund experiments that might lead to some AI guardrails. Ideally, OpenAI says the process will help answer questions like, under what conditions should AI systems condemn or criticize public figures? And how should disputed views be represented in AI? Once the 10 grant recipients are chosen, they'll have to showcase their concept, publish a public report on their findings, and open source the code behind the work. People can apply for the OpenAI grant program now through June 24th. The bets are already rolling in for the greatest spectacle in racing. The Indianapolis 500 is happening this Sunday at the largest sports venue in the world, Indianapolis Motor Speedway. More than 300,000 people are expected to be there in person, not just for the race, but for all the traditions like 2 flyovers, military tributes, a red carpet, and a DJ. This year's Grand Marshal is actress Stephanie Beatriz. This year's honorary starter is actor Adam Driver. As for the actual drivers, 33 of them are in the race, and that includes 9 former Indy 500 winners. You can catch it live on NBC or Peacock this Sunday. Coverage starts at 11 a.m. Eastern. That's it for the main news today, so now it's time for Feel Good Friday, when we bring you one extra feel-good or positive news story before the weekend. But first, I want to let you know about our sponsor, ZocDoc. Have you ever gone down a Google or social media rabbit hole looking for answers about a health concern? I know I have. And most of the time, it's not all that helpful, or I find a bunch of conflicting information and feel confused, or I realize there are a bunch of so-called experts who don't really have the credentials I can trust. So if you need answers from someone that is not random on the internet and want a trusted professional, ZocDoc is here to help. You can find a bunch of medical professionals that specialize in the care you need, and you can see their patient reviews right there on ZocDoc before you book. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient-reviewed, take your insurance, are available when you need them, and treat almost every condition under the sun. No more doctor roulette or scouring the internet for questionable reviews. Go to ZocDoc.com/newsworthy and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com/newsworthy. ZocDoc.com/newsworthy. Okay, now back to Feel Good Friday. A teenager turned her own personal hardship into a calling. A couple of years ago, Emily Batnagar found out her dad had thyroid cancer. So as she always did when she was feeling stressed or anxious, she turned to her books. Then Emily realized books could actually be a nice escape for a lot of children facing similar health scares. So she started using the money she made as a waitress to buy books for them. She also launched a neighborhood book drive in honor of her dad. And now, nearly 2 years later, her father's thyroid has improved, and her book drive has become a nonprofit called For Love and Buttercup. It's brought in donations of more than 15,000 children's books to hospitals in the Washington, D.C. area. And Emily is expanding nationwide, collecting books for children of all ages, from infants to teenagers. Between the pages, she often tucks a personal note with a positive message for kids. If you want to help Emily's mission, you can check out her Amazon wish list full of different books that will go to sick children. We've added a link in today's episode notes. All right, we'll be back tomorrow with our special edition Saturday episode explaining the debt ceiling. We are now just days away from the deadline to avoid a default, and the two sides are said to be close to a deal. But lawmakers did just leave for the holiday weekend, so don't expect any votes on it for the next few days. Tomorrow, we'll talk about how a default could impact the economy and our lives, as well as possible solutions to avoid this kind of last-minute debate in the future. Also, a quick note that our team will be taking the day off on Monday for Memorial Day, so we'll be back to catch you up on Tuesday with your next news roundup. For now, thank you so much for listening and have a great weekend.